Well, hello, everyone. We are back for season number 2 of Deconstructor's Club podcast. I am Alex Weiss, your host, with our co-host, Bob Azarito, who has a lot to say.
Hey, Alex.
He hasn't been on.
Holding it all in for all these weeks.
Yeah.
Finally, we get to say what we're... Right.
But we have a lot to say, though, because we have amazing episodes, at least these first 5, that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Christian nationalism, and we're going to have amazing guests. We're going to touch on that in a little bit, and it's just going to be amazing. Now it's ramping up to the elections. We're going to kind of talk a little bit about that too. I don't even know how we're going to touch on all those things today, but it's just an introduction. We're just going to kind of do an overview, and to just be. We're just excited to be back and be able to introduce these next episodes and these next guests. So, since then, we've been off for like, I don't know, a few weeks,
couple months,
maybe
really?
Month and a half,
something like that.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
What has Bob been doing in the last few weeks?
Well, let's see. So we took a little vacation, got away for 3 or 4 weeks, my wife and I, and I got COVID. I can't believe it. On vacation. You'd think you'd get COVID when you were like at work. You can take some time off. No, on vacation, get COVID for the first time. I hadn't had it before.
So when did you get COVID? On your way to England or?
In England.
In England.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We had 3 nice days, enjoyed it. And then.
Well, at least that.
Yeah. Right in the middle. Stayed in bed for 4 straight days.
Oh my goodness.
It was rough. Yeah.
Wow.
So I can now say I'm in the club. Speaking of Deconstructor, I'm in the COVID club.
You're in the COVID club. But at least
a club I was happy not to be in. Believe me, I did not want to get into that club. But yeah, I've got it now. So,
wow. Well,
I don't have it now.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But I'm so happy to be doing this again. I've missed it. I've missed the conversation and the interaction about stuff that's important to us. And, now that we're getting so close to this election, I mean, it's really getting down to the wire. It's a neck and neck election.
It's close.
And this topic that, religion always has played somewhat of a role in the elections, but this is different. This is a huge effort by a movement, really, that is very dynamic and very outspoken, and kind of scary in some ways.
It is, and which is Christian nationalism, right? It's very, very prominent within evangelicalism, and that's one of the main reasons why I left evangelicalism and deconstructed from a lot, specifically because of Christian nationalism and the dangers of Christian nationalism, but. To be honest with you, back then, I knew it was dangerous. I knew, it was building up to something, something dangerous. Mm-hmm. I just did not expect it to be as prominent as it is now. I understood that theology wanted what they have now and even more, but I just didn't expect it to be so quickly.
Yeah. Originally they were talking about white Christian nationalism because it was sort of started as sort of let's get back to the roots of when white people were controlling the churches and the theology, and but they've kind of dropped the white, at least I've heard, and it seems to be even broader than racial. It's got that component in it.
That's its foundation.
Yeah, but it has a broader appeal now, and I think that's the interesting thing about this movement. It seems to be attracting people who, many of whom are very, very dedicated to the principles of Christian nationalism, but also others that just kind of like aspects of it.
Right.
I was thinking like at the January 6th insurrection, for example. They weren't all Christian nationalists there, but they were in support of the effort of Christian nationalism. They may not have had a theological root,
Right.
theological roots, but they were very much interested in taking over for a variety of different and disrupting the peaceful transfer of power and that kind of thing. So it's interesting that at the core is this Christian nationalism, and other groups that are that agree with aspects of it have sort of, so it's made it my point is it's made it a very large coalition.
Right.
Very influential, and probably the largest part of the Republican Party is Christian nationalists.
And I think too, now that you mentioned, the white part dropping, which it's still a big part of its foundation and what it's about, but it's because in the broader sense, and that's what we're going to be talking about next week, because of our guest that's going to be with us, that there is a charismatic Pentecostal component to Christian nationalism that is very, very powerful and very dangerous. And because it's based more on a theology, ideology, it spreads more beyond just white. It spreads, beyond that with people of other ethnicities, but that believe in a specific doctrine or a specific teaching called the Seven Mountains Mandate, which is dominion theology. It's the takeover of what's Seven Mountains? Every influential institution of society, either it be education, either it be politics, the church, so forth, entertainment. What they're seeking is, the mandate is to influentially take over these institutions. So that way they can create this theocracy. So that's where it goes beyond, it's just, we want white people to, take over, which it's still that way, but it's more of, we want our political ideology to be taken over, which is a theological understanding of taking it by force. Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because we have a guest coming next week, and y'all gonna love this. It's gonna be good.
So Dr. Matthew Taylor wrote a book, and it actually, let's see, it actually comes out, October 1st, and this book is his understanding of a particular movement that probably started 40 years ago, to do just what you're talking about. A movement that was, first of all, linked to the old church growth movement that came out of Fuller Seminary. But you'll hear Matthew talk about the way in which this particular group has used their influence to bring America back to God. In terms of how they would explain that to Jesus, to bring the kingdom,
right,
and to what they call return America to its Christian roots. And I think that's always very interesting, because you use the word theocracy, and that really is what the hope and goal and objective is. But what's interesting is, you go back to the early framers, if you would even call them Christians in any sense of the word that we use it today, but
which many weren't.
No, many weren't. And but they were coming here to get away from this state-run religion, because that's what they were fleeing in Europe. They were fleeing that sort of oppressive state-run religion where everybody was required to adopt the same kind of beliefs and practices.
Right.
And they came here. So I don't know, the idea of returning to, now maybe it's returning to a European version of an earlier state-run religion, that would be more accurate than returning America to a theocracy.
And it's interesting, because the Seven Mountains that they're talking about, the mandate, it really is that. It's conquering those institutions and once again putting that influence back and bringing it back, taking it backwards, in other words, taking everything backwards to a perspective that's their own theological perspective.
And it's about defeating those who would disagree.
Exactly.
Having dominion over those who would disagree. Force people to submit to these mandates, to these laws, to these ways of living, and enforce those. Because there's a sense in which, and this is what I was hoping we could get into. There's a sense in which that's what Orthodoxy has often taught that Jesus would do. That Jesus would come back and Jesus would make people bow the knee. That Jesus would
rule by force.
And that vision is now just, brought into this sort of, well, we don't really have to wait for Jesus. We can do it ourselves.
Yeah, and that's a part of the mandate, actually. It's to prepare everything for Jesus's return, but not as a Jesus's return as in, coming to bring peace, but coming to
and by the way, I don't agree with that version of Jesus coming with with an AK-47 to put down his enemies. I don't think that's an accurate picture of what we read in the. I mean, the imagery is there, but it's just a bad interpretation to assume that that's what Jesus is going to come and do. But I was taught that growing up,
and that's what he told his disciples not to do. He taught them to love.
So being this is a Deconstructors Club podcast, this was one of the first places that I struggled with the evangelical teaching because it was so militaristic. It was so dominating. It was like, we need to make the world like us. We need to force the world to become like us.
And to do that, they needed enemies. They needed
we always had an enemy.
They always, I mean, and the devil became very prominent, which he's not in the Bible, but
devil.
They made the devil very.
Anybody who disagrees with me is of the devil.
Is the devil. It's like, you're demonic. You're full. That's why they don't reason with anyone outside of their point of view.
And then what we also did is we made being a part of God's family very much a closed
excluded
group. The people outside our group, the people outside our definition of Christian even, were not considered to be children of God. Were not considered to be part of God's family. It was they were them and we were us, and God loved us. And God, they wouldn't say this, but the way it sounded to me was they could be loved if they would join our group. That's the way it sounded to us.
And predestination theology actually even made it easier.
Some are just out of luck.
They're going to hell.
Out of luck.
They were born to go to hell.
They weren't chosen. Sorry about that, And I don't know how people lived with that.
That's just crazy.
How did they? I don't know.
Crazy teaching.
They just think, well, we leave it to God. And I think, well, that's a cop-out. I mean, it's so, when people hear that, just non-religious people hear that, they're like, what?
Right. It's insane. It's an insane theology. It's not even
right.
It's not relevant to love in any way.
So I was gonna. Do you mind if I share a couple of the?
I was gonna ask you that. I was gonna ask you because I know the past couple of Sundays that you've preached, it's been about Christian nationalism, and it kind of give us that context of what you're basing it on, and why we're going to be talking about Christian nationalism the next few weeks.
So this is Matthew's. This is Matthew's book, the Violent Take It by Force, and it's available. You can go on Amazon and order it, or wherever you get your books. And this verse was very captivating to me because this is a verse in the Bible. This is a verse in Matthew. And so I started a series of sermons up until the election. By the way, we're doing this for about 5 weeks up until the election, right? And maybe in the end of this, we can talk a little bit about this crazy election that we're looking. That's coming quickly, right?
Yeah,
it's coming quickly.
It is. We're trying to fit everything in a little bit of time.
This is an introduction, by the way. This is just whet your appetite. So I was talking about how people would want to refer to the scriptures as where they're getting their marching orders. And so I wanted to find out, was this, were these marching orders from Jesus? Are people really following Jesus by doing these things? So I went back to two passages. One was in Mark, and actually it's in the three synoptic gospels, but the story where Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And then they mentioned one of the prophets, and then Jesus says, "Well, who do you say that?" And Peter, he sort of answers, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." And then Jesus immediately tells them that, yes, God has shown you this, but I want to tell you, I'm also going to suffer and die and be mistreated and end up dying. And Peter, you remember, he takes great exception to this. He takes Jesus aside and begins to scold him strongly, rebuke him. It's a very strong word. And then the disciples are there.
Because it goes contrary to what they were trusting.
There's no way in the world
or believing was going to happen.
Anybody from that day hearing about the Messiah would see crucifixion and death as part of the story.
No, not at all, because that's not a Messiah story.
Right.
It's not a Messiah narrative.
And Peter just objected. What in the world are you talking about?
Yeah, because the Messiah is a political leader that's going to come and liberate.
Right. You're
like Moses.
We need you to kick the Romans out. We
Right.
need to stop the suppression. We need you to deliver us from suffering. And instead, Jesus goes to the cross. Jesus suffers. And he predicts that, and Peter says, and then when Peter is rebuking Jesus, strongly, Jesus says to him, "Get behind me, Satan." I mean, you could hardly get a stronger response. You're setting your mind on human things, not on.
Right.
You're not seeing this from God's point of view. You're just looking at it from the human point of view,
which is
control,
take over,
power.
Yeah.
And instead, Jesus was bringing something where it wasn't power over. There was no longer enemy.
Right.
He had this vision, this kingdom vision, the wolf lying down with the lamb, this idea of peace where the children play in the snake's pit, which no parent would be excited about. But still, the idea, the imagery.
Yeah, and the weapons turned into plowshares.
Yeah,
so forth.
absolutely. Yeah. The imagery is it's the end of war, the end of power, the end of control. So all of a sudden you realize that the disciples, why they scattered at the end, they couldn't figure out, how does this fit in with this idea of Messiah or deliver?
Right.
And then the other one is where this text comes from, and that was when John,
his disciples.
When John sends his disciples to Jesus,
John the Baptist. Yeah.
John the Baptist, sorry, he's in jail, and he sends his disciples to Jesus and says, Are you the one we've been waiting for, or should we look for another? And in a way, John was like not seeing what he expected to see. And so the way that...
And what was he expecting to see? Because even his sermon in the beginning of the Gospels give us an idea of what he wanted.
Yeah, so he was proclaiming the coming of Messiah, saying he's going to come and he's going to bring fire, and he's going to, his winnowing fork is coming. He's going to burn the chaff of the wheat, and all this
he's
sort of
expecting this judgment,
huge judgment on the world.
Right.
And then when he's in jail, he's waiting for Jesus to start, and Jesus doesn't start. And so when he says, "Who are you? Are you the chosen one, or should we look for another?" And Jesus says, "Go tell John that I help the blind see, I hear the deaf, I help the deaf hear, and I preach good news to the poor." That's what he says. And then he says a line, and also
that does not sound like a Christian nationalist.
It does not. No, and then Jesus says, and blessed is he who doesn't take offense at me. Blessed is he who isn't ashamed about what I'm doing to bring the kingdom. Because Jesus's way was the way of love. It wasn't the way of power.
No.
It wasn't the way of violence.
The way of peace.
It was the way of peace. And they couldn't get it then, and the Christian nationalists can't get it now.
It's great. Yep. They can't. They don't. They're stuck with John the Baptist's version.
And Peter's at that moment.
And Peter's, yep. It's like, where's the conquering? Where's the dominating? That's our mandate, our Seven Mountains mandate, our mandate to take over all of the institutions and influence everything to the way we want it to be.
And one of the ways you can see this is take a look at the early church, what they were doing. They were feeding the poor. They were reaching out to the disenfranchised. Mm-hmm. They weren't running around collecting spears and knives and weapons to go fight the Romans now.
Right.
They understood. They understood what the suffering servant, came to do.
Right.
And so all of a sudden it became about love and kindness and gentleness and acceptance and inclusion. That was the way the early church started.
I was going to say that, which was the popularity of the early church
Absolutely.
for the first 200 years.
Absolutely.
They were always known as the ones that cared for the sick. They did the work of Jesus. They cared for the sick. They cared for the poor. They cared for the children, that were being abandoned. Yep. They were the ones that cared for the least of these, the vulnerable in society. So, and back then they didn't have all of these social programs. They were, and that's the reason why in some cases the empire wanted to, like, especially in 300, it was like, we need the church because they're the social program that we need.
Right.
So it's interesting the way the church was viewed back then to now we're talking about insurrection. They were a big part of the January 6th insurrection.
Yeah.
Let's take it by force.
Yeah, we're talking about people now who say, forget love. Forget that.
No, it's because
let's
Jesus
just storm
is
it.
back.
Let's just take it. We'll take it.
Yeah.
We'll just make them submit. And to call that Christian. So Jesus would say, get behind me, Satan, to the Christian nationalists.
Most definitely.
That would be his message. As he said to Peter, as he said maybe more gently to John, but still the same thing. That's not what I'm about. This is not the way to bring change.
Yep.
And we've been struggling to learn that for hundreds and hundreds of years, because the only way humans know how to bring change, I shouldn't say that, the only way political entities know how to bring change is at the tip of a spear.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of the other going on. There's a lot of love and service and kindness and acceptance. There's a lot of that happening. It doesn't make it on the news, but there's a lot of that happening. And then this is such a distraction,
right,
from a broadening, widening group of caring humans that are on every street and on every corner, and we have so much to learn. This is probably off topic, but 2 weeks ago in our church we had a couple of missionaries talking about the struggle of migrants all over the world. 280 million some migrants displaced from their homes, and how they're so often mistreated, but
trafficked, especially
trafficked, and yet there's a movement that is loving and caring and desiring and acting in the ways of compassion and kindness towards those who are the most needy.
And going back to Christian nationalism, when I talk about the charismatic Pentecostal movement, because it first of all, that's where I come from, and I have a lot of background into that. Right now, I'm not going to mention a lot of that probably in our discussion next week or the weeks to come.
Yeah,
I definitely will be mentioning more.
Absolutely.
Because we don't have the time for that this first episode. Right. But coming from that perspective, I saw the inner workings of a political agenda just continually developing and forming. I remember even, for instance, I was a part of the prayer movements of Lou Engle. I'll throw a name out there, but it's, if anybody would look him up, he is an of the apostles, prophets, general in warfare and spiritual warfare when it comes to prayer and prayer gatherings. He does large gatherings in stadiums with 60,000+ people, and they do prayer. And so you would think, well, there's nothing wrong with that. It's prayer, they're doing worship songs, they're doing prayer. It's great. But behind it, there's an agenda. And I knew that because of being a part of that movement and being, connected to him, even, as friends, we're connected. And I knew firsthand the agenda that was really going through, which was that pro-life agenda. And all of these large gatherings seemed to be about prayer, but they really weren't about prayer. There was a political agenda behind it. And it's always been that way, but it's like you're trying to discern it. You're like, okay, is it about prayer or what is this about? So they would say it is about prayer, but we're praying against abortion. We're praying against, these, for instance, these laws or these policies that would actually cause more inclusion of people, a loving people, or an understanding of people. And this was more of an excluding because it's a demonic, what is it called? It's a demonic initiative. It's from the devil. So, and that's the reason why they don't reason with anyone outside of their way of thinking, because they'll look at them as demonic.
Right.
So, but they're not the only ones. We talked about it, Southern Baptists and others that are very conservative. They don't believe specifically in the 7 mountains. They don't, that's not their mandate.
They don't have prophets and apostles.
No, and they don't even believe in that, the apostles and prophets. They kind of think, the charismatic movement is kind of crazy, weird.
Yeah.
But that's a problem. Not so much that it's not crazy weird, but that they don't respect it enough as to know that it's very powerful, and it's becoming the most powerful movement in the entire world. I mean, the largest evangelical and Christian movements that are going on in the Southern Hemisphere of the world are Pentecostal charismatic, and they're taking this mandate with them. A lot of these things, that apostolic reformation, what does that mean? Believing in apostles and prophets now that are generals, that are moving us toward the dominating of these 7 mountains. It's crazy. To even mention these things, and contrary to what you were talking about, what Jesus did.
Yeah.
The complete opposite of what Jesus said of discipling the nations. Their idea of discipling the nations is conquering nations.
It's interesting. So many these stories come back to me with, remember when John and James's mother came to Jesus to say, hey, can John and James sit at your right and your left when you come into your kingdom, right? They were expecting
they wanted
that
rule
Jesus was going to rule. And, like a good Jewish mother, she wanted to make sure her sons
they're locked into power.
And I think a lot of people, locked into power would be another good name for this book.
Locked into
power, because I think people are getting locked into power.
That's right.
And the opportunity to dominate, to rule, to control, to have that kind of influence and power it's one of the temptations of
it's
of
one
Jesus.
of the 3 temptations of Jesus.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Bow down to me, I'll give you the kingdoms of the world.
Yep. And that, again, completely missing the point that this is not the purpose of Christ.
And Jesus said, no.
Nope.
That's not for me. That's not my job. Even Jesus said it wasn't his job.
And yet Christians are doing the complete opposite. This is our job. This is
totally
what God has mandated us and called us to do.
Yeah, because, and one of the things I had mentioned in the church was I talked about the reason that the Christian movement was first called the way.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was a way of being, not just the what of being.
Right.
It was the way of love, not just get people to stop doing this and stop doing that. It was how we treat people, how we show value and dignity and kindness and respect to people, even people who are doing things that we don't agree with. That's the whole point of Jesus. That's Jesus and the woman caught in adultery, or Jesus and the Samaritans, or Jesus, anybody you can think of in terms of, the Bible goes overboard to try to show the person Jesus was and the way he dealt with. people.
Yet this movement completely ignores that completely. Well, it's because Jesus has become a mascot to them. They use him
Mascot, that's a good
for their own agenda.
Absolutely.
He's just a mascot.
Yeah.
It's like, this is about us. It's not about Jesus, but we're using Jesus because he's our authority for it. Well,
that's so funny because if you pick and choose out of the Bible, you've got all this imagery that when you cut it away from everything else, looks like you can use Jesus as the victor, as the king. We talk about that, not a king like that. There's like other kings. We never refine it to show that Jesus wasn't interested in being. In fact, I was going to read from this. I cut this out of my sermons, and I didn't have time on it, but since podcasts can go on forever, I'm going to.
Since we don't have time here.
I'm going to tell you about it.
No limits.
Real briefly, there's a story of the feeding of the 5,000 in John. It's in all the. In fact, it's the only miracle in all the Gospels, the feeding of the 5,000. But in John, when he's finished, doing the, passing out, gathering up the extra baskets full. It says, when the people saw the sign, this is verse 14 of chapter 6 of John, that the sign that he had done, they began to say, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. And then verse 15, when Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When Jesus recognized that they were about to come and make him somehow by force, somehow force him, somehow, exude power over him somehow, when he realized that they were interested in making him king by force, that was their view of the prophet, he disappeared.
Isn't it crazy that was their agenda?
Totally.
So they were even willing to force him because of the influence he had. So basically they're saying, we want to use that influence.
Mascot.
That's Jesus as the mascot.
Yeah.
That's exactly Christian nationalism. We want to use that influence that you've had all this time, but we want to coronate you. We want theocracy.
We're going to use the feeding of the 5,000, not with the idea that Jesus can feed and nourish and care for people, but we're going to use that as what an amazing miracle. Now
let's use it to conquer.
Use him to take over the world.
To take over. Let's do it. Let's get liberation. Let's take over. Let's conquer the world. Yet they completely missed the purpose. You know what's interesting too that you just said? He went up to the mountain alone. He separated himself alone, because that means the disciples must have been.
They were part of it.
They were
part of it. I think they were leading the cheers. Right? I think he's under, Jesus is king.
Right.
Jesus is,
I can already see Judas, especially, it's like, this is why we're here.
Yeah. So
revolutionary.
In some of the other Gospels, it says that Jesus, right after that, when this was going on, he pulls the disciples out right at this point, takes them down to the boat, puts them in the boat, and sends them to the other side. And then he goes off into the mountain alone. And that's when that's amazing, because that's when the storm happens.
If you put it together, it's almost like Jesus is saying, get in there. You guys got to calm down.
Think about what you're doing, because this isn't what I'm about.
That's not the purpose. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And then later on the storm, we know the story. So it's interesting when you begin to look at the scripture with a different angle like this, then you begin to understand what he was doing. And it's almost like this is what he's doing now. It's like, you all need to calm down. I need to put somebody in a boat.
I need to send you off because you are in the wrong. But it's happened so many times in history. I think of the Crusades, of the way in which they gathered these armies of people to go and attack, those who had taken Jerusalem, the Muslims who had taken Jerusalem, and how the Pope had given them this because they were already embedded in this idea that we are to take it by force.
Right.
And and how we have failed as the church, as disciples, to represent Jesus in the world when we fall for that.
So how does this influence, because our time is almost up for this first episode, how does this influence the elections coming up?
Yeah. Well, right now, the largest voting bloc, if you think of it, is this group of radicals who want to just take it by force.
Right.
And like I said, they don't all necessarily believe the same things, but if they can get their way, they're willing to go along.
Well, this is the point. Their candidate has been Trump, who basically is not aligned to any Christian value whatsoever. And they justify that by using the whole Cyrus thing from the Old Testament. Remember, hey, Cyrus wasn't a Jew. He was a pagan, emperor.
All Cyrus did was let him go.
But they use the scripture that say he was anointed like Messiah.
Right.
He was the Messiah for their liberation at that time. That didn't mean that he was a believer or that he believed, any of that. So they justify that using that scripture, saying,
they do.
This is Trump. We don't expect him to be a Christian. We don't expect him to say the right things. We don't expect. What they're doing is, though, it has nothing to do with that Cyrus scripture, which is totally off.
Right.
But again, let's use the power.
Trump's a mascot.
Trump is their mascot.
Yeah.
Basically, that's it.
I wonder if he would like that.
And it's funny because he thinks he's using them.
Right.
He's using them to get what he wants
into power,
when actually they're using him.
Yeah. And that's the worst kind of using, when people use each other.
They're using each other.
And that can't end well.
Nope. It's not. Nope.
So it's neck and neck, this election. We're 5 weeks out. We're 5 weeks out. And it's people are so anxious. I bet there are people anxious on both sides.
Yeah.
I'm anxious. Are you anxious?
I'm very anxious. I'm nervous about this whole situation because,
do you have any idea what you think might happen?
I don't. I think it's neck and neck. It's going to be hard. I think that we're going into this last month. What happens this month is probably going to be what's going to fully impact the elections, because there's still a lot of undecideds, especially those swing states. So, and to be honest with you, I am tired right now of hearing the news about these people that are not decided. Folks,
what else do you need?
Month left and you're not decided. I mean,
I guess they're going to go into the booth and just close their eyes and...
You're not decided. I will tell you one thing, because I don't know if this even applies, but how I said we're kind of touching things.
Yeah.
It's introduction, so we're touching it all over the place.
We haven't talked in a while. We need to.
No, I know.
We're just thinking of things, dude.
But I know that there's undecideds and then there's uncommitteds. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that, you said, what's the difference? Well, an undecided is still trying to see who's going to help me out best financially, inflation, blah, blah, blah. The uncommitteds, for the most part, are the people that stand to your left, that have a way more progressive mindset, and they're not committed to Kamala because they are not committed to Biden when it comes to Israel and what's happening in the Middle East. And then now you have Lebanon and what's happening. We went from Gaza to Lebanon, and it angers them even more.
Right.
And it doesn't help Kamala Harris's case when it comes to elections. So is she saying enough? Is she promising enough? Is it enough what she's saying? That's the hard part, because she's talking about, Israel has its right to defend itself and blah, blah, blah. And at the same time, Gazas have the dignity to, live and not be wiped out.
This is the hard part, because you have a division in our citizenship between those who think that, there's a lot of division within Israel itself. Ton of division.
There's a lot of people in Israel that completely disagree.
The largest
with what's happening.
Protests, huge protests. So let's not assume that Israel is, speaking with one voice. But I would say, though, when you're at this point in the election, you really can't afford to lose any votes.
Yeah.
So it's really hard.
Yeah.
Because I think Kamala does not like in my opinion, does not like what's going on in Israel.
Well, she's saying that.
Right. I believe that. But I think probably not strong enough for those
I think so.
who are, but the problem is
that we're talking about.
If you say too much, then you end up losing the side that
you alienate some of those that are
it's a tough spot.
Democrats, but yet more pro-Israel.
I would say this to our Palestinian friends, because I despise and feel frustrated with what Netanyahu is doing and leading Israel into. It's so uncalled for.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you, the Palestinians are going to be way worse off under Trump.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's the one who moved the capital to Jerusalem.
Right. And a lot of people forget that.
Not the capital. The capital?
Yeah, because it went from Tel Aviv.
Right. He's the one who did that. The sign, and that was very, very disturbing when Jerusalem was supposed to be an international city. So it was, I think it's such a hard time right now but I hope they vote. I really do. I hope they vote and just think about which side can we influence? Which side do we have a greater shot at influencing once they're in office?
I will say this too, because to the uncommitteds, I would say we still got to give her a chance. In essence, we don't know yet.
Right.
We don't know yet. We can't say, well, because Biden, but will she do the same thing? We don't know yet. And even though there's been times where maybe it's gone one way, or she said something one way and then she said something another way, but we don't know yet. So I would prefer that, to be honest with you. I would prefer that than exactly knowing what you get.
Exactly
what Trump
get. Yeah.
So, and that was my case when Biden was running. It was like, for me, it wasn't, I don't know. It was like, I exactly know.
Yeah.
So for me, that was a tough one, because I exactly know what's going to continue to happen if he continues. But yet at the same time, I understand this other side of things with Trump. But now there's an opportunity here. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah.
And the newness that she's promising, I still don't know what that looks like. But I'll be honest with you, I'd prefer to give somebody a chance over what you already know could happen.
Yeah. I know we're running out of time. I want to give one little thought that came to my mind, because this is a Deconstructors Club podcast. And I know that there are a lot of people who probably are a bit confused by the use of the term Christian in Christian nationalism. Mm-hmm. And I think it's been hard to see this word used in this way, because you begin to feel like that's the definition. And everybody, that must be the definition. If you're not religious, you're not church going, you just assume that people who are churchgoers or who identify with Christianity, just like all Jews must support Netanyahu, for example. All Christians don't support Christian nationalism. So Don Lemon, the journalist.
Which real quick, by the way, you can be a Christian and vote Democrat.
Absolutely.
I'm just saying that because when you're taught under evangelicalism is anybody that votes outside a Republican Party is not a Christian to them. Right. And we're like, come on, man.
Right. There are Christians in both parties.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Don Lemon wrote a book about his story of faith. He's a gay man, and he talked about how, in the book, I haven't gotten it, I haven't ordered it yet, but he talks about how hard it was to grow up in the church years ago as a gay man in evangelicalism, essentially. And so the interviewer asks Don Lemon, do you go to church now? Because he talked about how his faith had grown and he had discovered some things, and the book is about that. Mm-hmm. And he says, no, I don't go to church. And he said, why would I go to church when who I am isn't respected when I'm ostracized by the church. And I thought immediately to myself, I understand that completely, but I thought, how sad that those places in the church that affirm, gays and lesbians and, and people, of other orientations. He didn't include that. It's not in his awareness that there are churches that aren't against him as a person. Yeah. And I think that now about Christian nationalism, the same sort of way.
Yeah.
That the public doesn't realize that there's a whole swarm of Christians who don't support
that are progressive minded
and don't support Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
Who don't support,
who abhor it, really
taking it by force. Who wouldn't identify with Peter or John in those moments in their lives. And I think that's part of the struggle, I think, for us as leaders in the church is, what do we do about this?
Right.
What do we do? Because you know what? This election is important, but it's not going to be an end to anything.
Right.
This movement is going to continue to struggle. Even if Trump doesn't get in, this movement is going to continue to fight to take control.
I think we need to do an episode on that. I think doing an episode specifically to talk about strategies that could be useful to mainline churches and to progressive churches. And why do I say mainline churches, progressive churches? Because those are the ones that have shown how they are this anti-Christian nationalism that is hurtful, harmful, and dangerous. So it's not easy. I mean, I'm not saying that we're going to come up with an episode and we have all the answers.
No, but to talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's good to discuss and talk about. So stay tuned because we got some really good episodes coming up.
So next time we'll have Dr. Matthew Taylor with us.
It's gonna be fun,
and you'll be able to hear some of what he has written about. A very, very helpful study, I think, is very crucial to understand this particular movement that is at the forefront of the Christian nationalism.
Yeah, and now that you're mentioning that, I think it's very key because every time people talk about Christian nationalism, they're always talking about either the Southern Baptist or the conservative side of things. But this is not just the conservative side of things.
It's a many-pronged.
This is a radical.
Very radical.
And so we have to, it's going to be a good episode. So, hey, well, it's our first one. We're introducing our second season. We're excited for what's to come in the next few weeks.
I missed it.
It's been awesome.
I've missed our conversations.
That's been sad, but now we're not anymore. Now it's awesome that we're back.
Yes.
And hey, leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If these are subjects that you guys, enjoy to listen to, or it's informative for you, let us know. Message us. We're on YouTube. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please do that. You can get the first season too on our YouTube channel. And you know what? We've been doing like highlights of our episodes on YouTube. We cut it back, but we're going to do this. We're going to do the whole episode again. We're going to put all the full episode on YouTube. And we'll probably do a smaller one, a more condensed one. But for, the socials, they all have to be short. So in the socials, we're going to be doing, snippets here and there of the episodes, but we'd love for you to, tune in on our episodes, our podcast, we're on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, and also here on YouTube, you'd have the entire episode. But let us know what you're thinking about, how you're feeling about this. You have any questions, ideas, things that, you would like for us to talk about. Just know that you're not alone in this journey. We're walking with you. We're here with you, especially right now before the elections and how anxious things are. Let us even know, hey, I'm nervous too.
Yeah, and we're starting off a little political, I realize, for season 2. But politics isn't our main. It just so happens that
we're going up to elections. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, well, plus it just how happens that Christianity is right in the center of the debate. So it's hard to avoid right
and now that we're talking about deconstructing, this is a big issue. So it's important. So let us know, especially if you're in this process of deconstructing. And this has been a main issue for you. Let us know how we're helping you, how we can help you. Yep. So, all right. Well, thanks for tuning in. Can't wait for next week where we have Dr. Matthew Taylor is going to be with us. It's going to be pretty amazing. Stay tuned. We'll see you next week. Take care.